Hi, I'm Yaakov Katz, and welcome to the Jewish People's Podcast by JPPI. President Joe Biden's terrible performance during the presidential debate last week sent shockwaves across the United States. Party members and many of the Democratic supporters are calling on Biden to step down and make way for another candidate, one who they hope and believe will have a better chance at defeating Donald Trump in November. The effect on Israel will be in the way its adversaries now view American power in the Middle East. The debate was not just about what happened in the US, but it will resonate across the globe. After Biden's tragic performance, is Hamas now more inclined to fold to US pressure, agree to a hostage deal, and end the war, or not? Is Hezbollah in Lebanon going to agree to a US dictated deal to avoid war, or not? Long ago, Israel tied itself strategically to the United States. To me, it's always meant that when the US is strong, Israel is perceived as being strong and vice versa. After the debate, though, it's hard to view the US as being strong and powerful. And the question is whether and how this will bode for Israel as it continues to fight wars on multiple fronts. To discuss this, I'm joined by two senior JPPI fellows, both experts on the US as well as on the Israel-US relationship. Professor Gil Troy, a historian who has written a number of books on U.S. presidents, as well as Shmuel Rosner, a journalist and author who spent Thursday night awake in an Israeli TV studio, Kan, the public broadcaster, analyzing the debate as it happened. So let's begin. And Gil, let me start with you because I'm curious to get some of before we dive into the kishkas of it, let's say, the historical kind of perspective that you bring to the table in terms of debates. Everybody, there was that one moment which I just found amusing. Debate was terrible. I watched it I started it after it had just ended, so early in the morning here at about 5:30. But within like an hour, you had four of the top New York Times columnists: Thomas Friedman, Paul Krugman, Nicholas Kristof, I think Frank Bruni, all of them writing, he's got to go, as if they wrote these beforehand or it just came out. As the three of us know, as regular writers, sometimes you're so passionate about something, it just flows off the fingertips onto the keyboard. But they were so quick to turn on this guy. But it was one debate. I mean, how do you go? So I'm curious, has this ever happened before in such a fast-paced way? And how do you view, just in general, the way it played out?
So historically, there are kind of two phases to a debate. One is what actually happens during the 60 minutes or 90, in this case, 90 minutes, and then the spin. The classic example of that was in 1976. Gerald R. Ford was debating, and he casually mentioned he was running for re-election against Jimmy Carter, and he hadn't formally been re-elected, but he was president. And he basically mentioned that the Eastern European countries were free. And what he meant in the context was that they were less oppressive than the Soviet Union. And nobody really noticed it. And actually, we had polls. You can see in the Ford Library. I went to track this. It was fascinating. Nobody really noticed it, and most people thought he actually did okay in the debate. Right after the debate, a number of commentators said, "What? Did you just free Eastern Europe from under the power of the Soviets?" And for the next 3 days, the media went on and on about how Gerald Ford didn't understand the Cold War and he lost the debate. And so it was really interesting for me to see, yes, how awful the 90 minutes were. Barack Obama got off the best line because he also had a bad debate saying, well, you can have a bad night. But the fact that since then, the knives have been out. And I have to say, someone like Thomas Friedman, part of the reason why I don't trust him on the Middle East is I don't trust him on other issues too. The guy has sat with Joe Biden. If he was shocked that over the last 3.5 years, Joe Biden has been diminished by age, then he just wasn't paying attention. And what was really interesting was that there had been this huge gap in America between the conversation most people were having about Joe Biden and the conversation the mainstream media and the Democrats were allowing to be had about Joe Biden. And finally, on Thursday night, it caught up with one another. And now the big question is, and it's funny, now there's actually a phase three, because phase three, we're starting to see, again, Obama saying, well, it's just one night, judge the presidency by 3.5 years, not by 90 minutes. Still, who would you rather have, Joe Biden or Donald Trump? But the biggest question for Democrats is who's better. The biggest question for Democrats is which of these people who are being mentioned, from Kamala Harris, who's way more unpopular than Joe Biden, to Gavin Newsom, who Donald Trump would just have fun running against California and saying, do you want to turn your world into San Francisco? One after the other doesn't seem to have the ability to solve the problem, which is how do we make sure that Donald Trump is not elected, which is the Democrats' problem.
So Shmuel, I mean, you were in the studio through the night. You probably I'm hoping you got a few hours of sleep before. You and I were on a radio show together, and then you were going to sleep, waking up just a few hours later to basically be a commentator and analyze the debate as it happens. So I'm curious, as somebody who's watching it live from an Israeli TV studio, you know, Israelis, we tend to look at things obviously from our little perspective in our pond, and we're going to get to that in a moment. I do want to dive a little deeper into what does this mean, if anything, for us. But just sitting in the studio, what was the mood like? What was the feeling of, how shocked were the other people there with you?
Oh, we were shocked. We were perplexed by the performance of Joe Biden, and it started immediately. You know, 2 minutes into the debate, it was clear that something is not well with the president. In fact, he had gotten somewhat better later in the debate, but the first few minutes were shocking in the sense that we weren't quite sure if he's going to last until the end of the debate. It was perplexing. It was worrying to some extent. And you know, as you said at the beginning of your at your introduction, for an Israeli to watch such thing from afar is worrying, because we in Israel tend to consider ourselves part of the Western Bloc. We are also under the umbrella, under the leadership of the United States. And if the leader of the free world looks like this, behaves like this, speaks like this influences us, and we are not in the best shape ourselves right now. So to see the president of the United States performing in such way, again, it was puzzling and it was worrying. You know, as a journalist, there's no better story than this one. But as a citizen of Israel, I was not pleased with the things that I saw.
Also just painful to watch. I mean, I can't imagine anyone who has a heart who didn't watch this and say, I mean, this, you know, see their elderly father or their elderly grandfather, or think back to those people, and people decline. Just, the guy's a good guy, no matter what you think of his policies being right or wrong. He's not a bad man. So that was just, it was excruciating. I felt almost to just like,
I must say that I had the same feeling when I started reading the quick response by senior columnist. It was clear that something was wrong with the performance of President Biden, but I felt somewhat uncomfortable about the tendency. Yeah, the way that they immediately, you know, they were ready to throw him under the bus like 5 minutes after the debate. I'm not sure they were wrong to demand that he will quit the race and let someone else replace him. But this also made me feel somewhat awkward and embarrassed for America in general. You know, here's your president, here's your cast of analysts, and both of them did not seem at their best that night.
Yeah, 100%. I agree. You know, talking about Israel, though, for a moment, there was one question that did touch on Israel. If you look at the debate itself, is when Dana Bash asked about the Hamas attacks, and kind of tied it together with the just general instability that we see today in the Middle East, as well as what's happening, obviously, in Russia, Ukraine. She did mention, to her credit, the fact that there are 8 Americans, 5 of them hopefully believed still to be alive, who are being held in the Gaza Strip. But none of the candidates, and I think that question went, if I recall correctly, went first to Donald Trump, right? But none of those candidates really wanted to talk Middle East policy. It was Trump did what he did with his, you know, Hamas never would have attacked had I been president, and I'll solve Russia, Ukraine just as president-elect, even before taking the Oval and taking office. Were you both, and let's start with you, Gil, were you surprised that the Israel, Hamas, Middle East didn't play more of a role in the debate, or was it that expected?
As an American political historian, I have a healthy appreciation for how insignificant foreign policy issues and Israel usually is in most presidential elections. And in this election, it actually looms larger than usual. And in this debate, it actually loomed a little bit larger than usual. Also, I have to say that one of the things that did happen in this debate, and it's happened in 2020 and 2016 and 2012 and 2008 and back and back and back, is that both candidates were basically saying, hey, I'm more supportive of Israel. No, I'm more supportive of Israel. Joe Biden did eventually go back to say, I have been very supportive of Israel. And he said something very important in terms of some of the other discussions we've had. He said, Israel has weakened Hamas, and Israel has to eliminate Hamas. And that was very clear. And then Donald Trump being Donald Trump. And by the way, we should be careful not to also ignore the fact that Donald Trump's performance did not elevate any American citizen and did not do great for the United States of America's sense of pride. But, Donald Trump being Donald Trump then said, yeah, he's a Palestinian, but he's a bad Palestinian because he's a weak Palestinian. Now, that's very embarrassing talk and obviously not respectful. But Trump is a very intuitive politician. What does that show? He understands that the American people are with Israel. He understands the American people don't want the kind of thuggishness we're seeing on the street. And so you actually had both presidential candidates saying, hey, I'm more pro-Israel. No, I'm more pro-Israel, which is important for Israel, endorsing Israel's war aims. And then Trump said, yeah, let the guy finish the job. Let them finish the job. And showing that all this media conversation about how the American people are abandoning Israel is just not true. So actually, I would take from the debate, from the conversation, some good news, which is that the American people are still with Israel, and American candidates understand that this election is not going to be won by throwing Israel under the bus.
Interesting. And Shmuel, what was your take on the role of Israel, Palestinians, foreign policy in general in the debate?
Well, first of all, it was clear to me that the Israeli issue or the Israeli-Palestinian issue is not a convenient one for President Biden to talk about. Whatever one might think about his attempts to resolve the conflict, his ability to influence it was limited in many ways. We are 9 months into the war, and President Biden does not have much to show for. I can't say it is his fault, but the fact of the matter is that for Trump, there is an easy argument to make. When I was president, I brought peace, the Abraham Accords. When you're president, you brought war. And that's it. The case closed, and there's nothing President Biden could say to balance the ticket, so to speak, on that issue. And that's why I think for President Biden, it was better to move away from this issue as quickly as possible. His response on the question was not quite clear. He tried to have it in some way both ways, because President Biden is being attacked both from the right and from the left on the issue of Israel. He has the progressive Democratic wing that attacks him for being too supportive of Israel. There are the people attacking him for being not enough supportive of Israel. Donald Trump does not have such problems, so it was easier for him to handle the question, to say, well, had I been there, this would never have happened. One never knows, maybe not. But the fact of the matter is that the situation is more helpful to Donald Trump than to Joe Biden. I do agree with Gil. Both candidates expressed their support for Israel. Both agreed that Hamas should be eliminated. Trump was somewhat clearer on the issue of letting Israel finish the job. With Trump, it was clear that as far as he's concerned, Israel can just do what it needs to do, and there will be no arguments over human rights and Palestinian suffering and, laws of war and all the things that are of higher concern to the Biden administration, and that raised some difficulties and some challenges in the Israeli-US relations. So I think for many Israelis watching Donald Trump in this debate, it was easy to assume that Trump will be more convenient for Israel when it comes to managing the war. However, and this is something that people did pay attention to, when he was asked about a Palestinian state, Donald Trump did not say that he opposes a Palestinian state.
Right.
He said something such as, we'll deal with it when it comes, which means I might go back to the Trump plan, which included a Palestinian state.
Right. Which, by the way, I mean, people on the right here in Israel tend to think the Trump plan was so amazing, right? But it did actually call for the establishment of a Palestinian state.
No, so what I'm saying that the Israeli right, the Israeli right tends to think that Trump is better for Israel than Biden, but enthusiasm for Trump today is not as high as what it was, back in 2020.
100%. So let's talk for a moment about the results, though, of the debate, and what does it mean, let's say, for Israeli security. So, I've long believed, and I said this in the introduction, that the way America is perceived and the way that it projects power does also radiate to the way Israel is perceived. So, if you're Hamas right now, and you're Yahya Sinwar, who anyhow we know is holed up probably in some tunnels, seems to have been laughing at all of us all this time because A, we can't get to him, and B, as he wrote in those communications that were revealed in the Wall Street Journal, he has Israel exactly where he wants it. He's seen how America has been cracking down on Israel already. He's seen how the world's been cracking down with the ICC, with the ICJ. The denial of certain weaponry to Israel, although maybe that's now being cleared up after Yoav Gallant, the defense minister's visit to Washington last week. But at the end of the day, does this have any impact on the way what Hamas now will do or what Hezbollah will do? Am I wrong to believe that they are somehow connected and linked, Gil?
First of all, what I found actually dismaying in the debate was there was one exchange where Joe Biden said, "Oh, we have no troops in harm's way." And Donald Trump said, "What about the 13 who were killed in Afghanistan?" And neither of them mentioned that 3 soldiers were killed in Jordan. 3 American soldiers were killed in Jordan in
by
January.
Iranian militias. Yeah.
And where that connects to your question is that the entire question of 180 attacks by Iranian-backed terrorist groups, proxies as they call them. But I think we have to emphasize that they're, the belly of the beast is Iran. The disruption that the Houthis have successfully imposed on international shipping, the degree to which Americans are paying more and waiting for things to be delivered because of the Houthis is just not an issue. And that does get to your issue of one doesn't feel that neither President Trump nor President Biden is ready to kind of take on the challenge of Iran. They're not ready to take on the challenge of Hezbollah. They're not ready to, Hamas is actually, at the end of the day, a minor matter. Sinwar can say what he says, but he's deep in a tunnel, and, Hamas's military might has been severely degraded. And I feel very comfortable with my kids volunteering down on Kibbutz Be'eri and my cousin moving back to Kibbutz Nirim. I think that problem has been more or less managed. The bigger issue, which is the North and Iran, is just not being taken care of. And I do think that the weakness that Biden betrayed makes it harder for Israel to do what it needs to do, and makes us more aware of the fact that as the tension around November grows, around the November election grows, it'll be harder and harder for Israel to do what it needs to do, because American politics will play a role, and no American political leader wants a war during a very difficult election where, Dearborn can be lost. And I, again, keep on saying I think they're too focused on Dearborn, but there are 12 key counties in Michigan, most of which went Obama and then went Trump, and they actually should be thinking more of the center, that are in play. And this whole, the more chaos you have in American politics, the less assurance you have that America has Israel's back.
One of the things that I've been hearing from people, especially within the Biden world, is that if he loses the election, now I think the debate will change that to an extent, because if he loses now and if he runs and he loses, you'll be able to maybe point back to the debate on the 27th of June. But people had been saying it was largely also due to his support for Israel that he had been seeing a decline, and that even I've heard advisors of his, people within the administration, who have said that in meetings they've said to him, you gotta move, you gotta create some distance. It's not good for you politically. And he doesn't listen. And that, in other words, it was their way of saying to me, you Israelis should be more appreciative of what he's been doing because it comes with a great political gamble and risk. Do you think, Shmuel, that I mean, if that were to happen, I would say to myself, that's not good for Israel, obviously. In other words, that people are going to blame us, this country, for Biden losing the election. And anyhow, when it comes to the Democrats, we're facing a big uphill battle, as all studies have shown, to support declines within support voters for the Democrats. So how do you view where that plays out?
Well, first of all, people are going to blame us for obvious reasons. They will blame us because it plays into their advancing their agenda. So blaming Israel for the loss of Michigan or whatever state will be something that some people are going to do. What people tend to forget is that when you gain somewhere, you also lose somewhere else. And the question of what would have happened had Biden been less supportive of Israel is not just about the support he gets in these counties in Michigan. It's also about the support he might get in other counties in other states. So he might be able to win more easily Michigan, but then if he loses 3 other states because of his decision not to support Israel, then the gain and the loss doesn't balance out. I don't think it would have been a wise move on his part, politically speaking. Well, let's say this first. I'm sure that Biden supported Israel because he truly supports Israel. He is a Zionist. He has it in his heart. I have no doubt about his true feeling concerning his true feelings for Israel. And I think that Biden is sincere in the sense that he did not want to put too much emphasis on political considerations when he thought about the future of Israel. Nevertheless, if you do think about the politics of it, I think that what Biden was trying to do is balance the need to somewhat, give something to the left side of the party, to the left wing of the party, without abandoning Israel, both because he cares for Israel and because he knows that abandoning Israel is not politically beneficial for him. It might get him some praise in some left-wing progressive quarters, but in other places he's going to lose support. He might have lost some support over Israel even now. So again, this is something that's very hard to get an exact picture of. What would have happened had he said this or that on Israel. I think that he was trying to strike the right balance, and I think that completely abandoning Israel, saying I do not support Israel in this situation, would not be beneficial for him in the political scene.
So one last thing before we wrap is what's looming later this month, July 24th, is Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu's famous speech before Congress. Everybody in Israel is waiting with great anticipation for what Netanyahu will say. I'm saying that with a lot of sarcasm, if you can't hear it or see it. Personally, I think it's a complete waste of time, totally unnecessary, serves nothing for Israel at the moment. People might not like me saying that, but I think that Netanyahu should be speaking to his own people before he goes and speaks to Congress and basically telling us, what am I doing? What is the plan for where we are all headed? But anyhow, he is headed to Washington on July 24th. Does this change anything? Does what happened in the debate change? We still don't know if there was ever going to be a meeting between Netanyahu and Biden. Didn't seem like a very likely. But do we think that this will now even make that less likely, more likely? Maybe Biden will want to actually cozy up with Netanyahu, show that he's can get some benefit or some sort of success now on the Israeli front. maybe Netanyahu is going into more treacherous waters than we thought before with his speech on July 24th. So I'm curious how both of you see that. Let's start with you, Gil.
If Netanyahu didn't realize that he was going to treacherous waters between the Republican convention and the Democratic convention, then he's not paying attention. I think it's a huge mistake to go in during this fraught moment, during this brittle American political moment, into Congress, because if he's too appreciative of Biden, then Trump and the Republicans will say, "How dare you?" And if he's not appreciative of Biden enough, then the Democrats will say, "How dare you?" Where's the win? Where's the upside? Bipartisanship isn't a value in the American Congress anymore. It's not 1986 when he was in Washington. So I think that's a mistake. What could happen, though, is it could be because Biden is now going to have to prove that he's a statesman and prove that he's effective on the world stages. He might be actually more open to having a meeting with Netanyahu. But I think that if there was an opportunity, if there was an excuse to cancel that speech and postpone it till after the election, I would beg him, if I was Bibi's advisor, to do it, because I just don't see an upside.
Shmuel?
Well, since we all three of us agree on the merits, all three of us agree that it would be better for Netanyahu not to go. Let me try and end with something positive. Maybe what happened now will force both candidates, both Biden and Trump, to outdo themselves in their support for Israel. Maybe this is an opportunity for Netanyahu to say, well, I'm coming to Washington. Here's a way for me to make both the president and possibly the future president say something, commit themselves to Israel in a more robust way than before, because both of them feel the need to express such support in order to get more people on their political bandwagon. So if Netanyahu uses this moment cautiously, maybe he can get something out of Trump and out of Biden that he wasn't able to get from them before the debate. I'm not sure that that's possible, but if I'm trying to project some positivity on this unnecessary visit, then this is what I can come up with.
Touche.
I commend you on the attempt at some optimism, and I want to thank both of you, Gil and Shmuel, for joining me today to take a bit of a deep dive through the debate and its impact on Israel. To all our viewers and listeners, thank you all for joining us. You can catch us on Thursday for another episode of the Jewish People's Podcast by JPPI. Until then, have a great remainder of your week. Thank you.